It was the kind of cold that lingered in the walls, even when the sun was out. The kind of cold that didn't just bite at your skin, but pressed into your ribs, into your breath. In Sepolia, a modest neighborhood in the heart of Athens, winter didn't arrive with snow. It arrived with silence, with stillness, with struggle. That night, like many others, two brothers lay on a thin mattress spread across a cracked tile floor. The edges curled upwards, and the fabric had long since lost any softness it once held. It smelled faintly of detergent, dust, and something harder to name, like endurance. Thanasis was the older, but barely. His arm was draped protectively over Giannis, whose eyes remained wide open in the dark. They whispered to each other in hushed tones, Greek and Nigerian dancing awkwardly together in a shared dialect only brothers could understand. Outside the apartment, the streets were restless, but inside they were frozen in their own little world. Giannis reached into the small box next to their mattress and pulled something out. It was flat, fragile, and wrapped tightly in a crude sleeve of clear tape. So much tape, in fact, that it glistened like glass in the faint light leaking through the curtain. He placed it carefully in Thanasis's hand. "I saved it," he said softly. Thanasis sat up slightly, eyebrows drawn together. He turned the object over. It was a basketball trading card, worn, creased at the edges, its corners softened by time. On the face of it, in a blur of red and white, was Allen Iverson, mid-crossover, his braided hair flying behind him like a comet tail. "No way," Thanasis whispered. His voice cracked. "I found it behind the kiosk," Giannis explained. "A guy threw out a whole stack. Most were wet. This one was okay." Thanasis turned it in his fingers like it was made of gold. "How you fixed it," he said. "I didn't want it to rip. I used Mom's tape." They both fell into silence again. Outside, a car alarm yelped and then went quiet. Inside, the gift changed hands and hearts. That card, cheap, faded, essentially worthless to anyone else, became their treasure. It wasn't about Iverson or basketball or even the NBA. It was about what it represented. A promise, a link, a shared dream. Every night, before they slept, they checked on it. Sometimes it was under Thanasis' pillow, other times hidden inside a shoe for safekeeping. They gave it a place of honor, even when there was no room for anything else. There were days they trained barefoot on the concrete court near the train tracks, where the backboard was splintered and the rim bent like a tired halo. Thanasis was always louder, always the one to push. Giannis, lanky and unsure of his limbs, followed his brother's footsteps like they were footprints in fresh snow. They'd return home soaked in sweat and laughter, stomachs empty, pockets emptier, but they had the card and the dream. Their parents, Charles and Veronica, worked endlessly, sometimes selling trinkets on the street, other times finding odd jobs wherever they could. Food was not always a guarantee, heat was a luxury. But love, that they had in excess, and with that love came the understanding that the world would not hand them anything. If they wanted something, anything, they'd have to take the long way together. Then came the day the landlord knocked, not with questions but with demands. Late rent, eviction warnings, an ultimatum. The family had 3 days to leave the apartment. Giannis and Thanasis didn't panic, not visibly. They helped their parents pack what little they had into black plastic bags. They worked quietly, moving from room to room like shadows, stuffing clothes, shoes, pots and pans into boxes salvaged from the supermarket dumpster down the street. Thanasis remembered the card. He tore through their small bedroom, flipping through pages of old notebooks, searching inside socks underneath floorboards that creaked when stepped on. Giannis stood in the doorway, frozen, knowing exactly what was being looked for and what had already been lost. "Did you move it?" Thanasis asked, eyes wild. Giannis shook his head. "It was under your pillow last night." Thanasis checked again, even though he already had. Nothing. They turned the room upside down. Every drawer, every crack, every pocket. Gone. The moment was quiet but seismic. Thanasis sat back on his heels, the breath knocked out of him by something that had no weight but all the meaning in the world. Giannis stood there motionless, shoulders square, refusing to cry but unable to blink. Their father called from the other room. The van had arrived. They had to go. There was no time left. As they left the apartment, Thanasis turned one last time to look back. Not at the furniture or the walls, but at the space where their mattress had been, where the card had lived, where they dreamed aloud. That night, they slept on another floor in another part of the city. New walls, same cold, and the card was gone. Neither spoke of it again, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. In a world where everything was already so fragile, so easily taken, it was easier to bury the loss than to grieve it. Time moved on. So did the Antetokounmpo family. Giannis grew taller, leaner. Thanasis grew tougher, louder. They continued to train, to grind, to hustle. But something had shifted. The silence that once held their dreams gently now carried something heavier. Years later, when scouts finally came and doors began to creak open, Thanasis would smile and cheer for Giannis louder than anyone else. He never once hinted at regret or jealousy. He was the older brother. He had taught Giannis how to dribble, how to shoot, how to believe. And maybe in some quiet place, he still carried the shape of that lost card in his memory, like a ghost pressed against the heart. But Giannis remembered. He remembered the look in Thanasis's eyes when he unwrapped it. He remembered the way they took turns guarding it like a sacred object. He remembered the sound of tape being peeled off the roll, his small fingers clumsy with excitement. And he remembered the silence, the sharp, terrible silence, when it vanished. He carried that silence with him. To Spain, to Milwaukee, to the draft, to the bright lights of arenas that echoed with cheers and chants. But deep beneath the roar, in a space no fame could reach, the silence hummed. Because greatness had a price. And for Giannis, part of that price was a promise he'd never made aloud, but had never stopped keeping. A promise to give back what was lost. Not just a card, a memory, a moment, a piece of their childhood that should never have slipped away. And so, even as the world saw him as a giant, Giannis never stopped being the little brother on a cold tile floor, watching his hero unwrap a gift salvaged from the trash, watching him believe that something small could still be everything, even if it disappeared. Years passed. The city of Athens, once the only world they knew, became a distant hum, like a childhood lullaby half remembered. But it was never forgotten, not by Giannis, not by Thanasis. Though the streets changed, though the language around them became American accented, and though the courts they now stepped onto were polished and bright instead of cracked and grey, some things stayed untouched by time. Giannis Antetokounmpo had become a name the world now spoke, first as a curiosity, then as a phenomenon, then as a legend in the making. From a raw, skinny teenager drafted 15th overall in 2013 by the Milwaukee Bucks to a two-time MVP and NBA champion, Giannis carved out a place not just in the league, but in the collective imagination of what was possible. He was dubbed the Greek Freak, a moniker that felt both grand and incomplete, because it said nothing of the boy who'd sold sunglasses in the streets, who'd run drills barefoot, who'd shared a pair of shoes with his brother so they could both take turns playing. And Thanasis? He wasn't in the headlines. His path was longer, more winding. After stints in Greece, Spain, and the G League, he finally joined the Bucks, not as a star, but as something arguably more essential: the heartbeat. The energy on the bench, the spark in the huddle, the brother who never stopped being a brother. Where Giannis flew, Thanasis grounded. He celebrated Giannis's victories with a joy that never asked for reflection. He was content in the shadows, because he knew exactly what had been required to create the light. But behind Giannis's focused eyes, behind every dunk, every chase-down block, every headline-grabbing stat line, something flickered, something private. In the still moments, on long flights between cities during quiet mornings in hotel rooms, or while staring at the rafters of Fiserv Forum after the crowd had emptied, Giannis would find himself haunted, not by doubt or fear, but by memory. A small rectangle wrapped in tape, a brother's smile, a promise unspoken. He had never forgotten the card. Not just the object, but what it stood for. It had become myth in his mind, like an heirloom stolen by time. He remembered its texture, its bend, the way Thanasis had handled it like it might crumble if held too tight. It wasn't about Allen Iverson anymore. It was about preservation. It was about home. And so, without announcement or spectacle, Giannis began looking. It started subtly, a question posed to an old friend back in Athens, a late-night call to a childhood neighbor who still lived near the old apartment in Sepolia. Then a discreet conversation with a European memorabilia dealer who specialized in vintage sports cards, particularly those that surfaced in street markets and flea shops after housing evictions. Most people, even those close to Giannis, didn't know what he was searching for. They thought it might be a rare card for a private collection or maybe a fan's request. But Giannis was relentless. He hired a small team in Athens, not professionals, just people who knew the streets, who remembered the weight of struggle, who knew what it meant to search for something long lost without a guarantee of return. It was a quiet obsession, not born from ego, but from love. He wasn't trying to fix the past. He was trying to give Thanasis something they'd both lost, a moment, a connection, frozen in cardboard and tape. Meanwhile, on the court, Giannis continued to ascend. The Bucks were contenders. His name was in MVP conversations year after year. Interviews, sponsorships, documentaries, all of it surrounded him. Yet none of it could touch the space inside him that belonged only to his brother. Thanasis was always there, on the bench, in the locker room, in the tunnel before the game, shouting encouragement, tapping chests, hyping teammates with fire only a true believer could generate. He didn't need a spotlight. He had his brother's back, and that was enough. But Giannis couldn't let go. Not of the memory, not of the weight of the card, not of what it had come to symbolize. Then one evening, while scrolling through a series of photos sent by one of his contacts in Athens, he froze. It wasn't the full card, just a corner of it, peeking out from a shoebox full of unremarkable collectibles in a second-hand shop. But he recognized it instantly, the glossy overlayer of aged tape, the angle of the crease on the lower left, the hint of red from Iverson's jersey. His heart skipped. He didn't hesitate. Within a week, Giannis was on a private flight to Athens under the cover of a sponsorship appearance. He brought no entourage, no press, just himself and a folded memory. The shop was quiet, tucked between a pharmacy and a cafe that sold kuluri with burnt edges. The air inside smelled like leather, dust, and old victories. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, thick glasses on his nose, wiping down baseball gloves that no one had touched in years. Giannis introduced himself quietly. The man already knew who he was, but said nothing about basketball. When Giannis showed him the photo, the man nodded, then reached under the counter and pulled out the shoebox. The card was still there. It was more damaged than he remembered. The edges were even more worn, the tape yellowed and peeling. But it was the same card, the same tape, the same spirit. He took it in his hand, and for a moment was back on the floor of that apartment, back under the covers whispering dreams, back beside Thanasis, who had believed in him before anyone else. He bought the card, though the man refused to name a price. Giannis insisted. He wrapped it carefully in a clean sleeve, but before placing it in his jacket pocket, he asked the man for a roll of tape. Not new tape, old tape, the kind that tears unevenly and sticks to your fingers. He resealed the card just as he had as a child. It looked wrong. It looked perfect. Back in Milwaukee, he said nothing. He trained, he played, he laughed with his teammates. But the card was with him always, in his locker, in his pocket, under his pillow, waiting for the right moment. That moment came quietly. No press, no cameras, no orchestrated surprise. Just a dinner, the two brothers, a small restaurant they both loved. Warm light, wooden tables, laughter that came easily. Near the end, as they sipped tea, Giannis pulled a small box from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. Thanasis raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" Giannis didn't answer, just nodded. Thanasis opened it, and the world slowed. Inside, the card, tape and all. His fingers hovered above it, trembling slightly. His face didn't register surprise at first, only disbelief, as if touching it might make it vanish again. When he finally picked it up, it took several seconds for him to speak. "This is..." Giannis smiled but said nothing. Thanasis stared at it. The years collapsed. He was a boy again. And this was magic. This was everything they had lost and everything they had managed to keep. Love, memory, sacrifice, survival, all wrapped in a piece of cardboard and a promise fulfilled. He looked up, eyes glistening. "You found it?" "I never stopped looking," Giannis replied. Thanasis stood and embraced his brother, the card still clutched in his hand. At another table, someone quietly filmed the moment, not to invade, but to remember. The clip would later surface online. It would go viral. Millions would watch. Not because they cared about Allen Iverson or basketball or even Giannis the MVP, but because they saw something rare, gratitude without words, a story told in silence. A brother's heart returned to him. But in that moment, none of that mattered. In that restaurant, on that night, there were no lights, no trophies, no fans. Just two brothers, and a gift that had finally come home. The moment didn't end when Thanasis hugged Giannis. It didn't even end when the box was closed and the card once again found a pocket to rest in. It lingered, like a note held at the end of a song, vibrating through the air long after the music had stopped. The restaurant around them returned to its quiet murmur of clinking silverware and soft conversation, but something had shifted, not in volume or in tone, but in weight, in presence. That night, neither brother spoke much after leaving the restaurant. They didn't need to. Thanasis held the small, wrapped card in his hands during the ride home, fingers brushing lightly across the aged tape, as if afraid the decades might peel away if he touched too hard. Giannis sat beside him, eyes forward, but every so often he stole glances at his brother's face, not to see if he liked the gift. He knew that already. He was watching something else, restoration, recognition. The kind of healing that doesn't need words, only time and love. The next morning the video was online. No one knew who had filmed it, just 38 seconds, shaky, quiet. Thanasis opening the small box, a slow inhale, the stunned silence. Giannis nodding once, the embrace, no captions, no edits, no tags. By noon it had already been viewed over 2 million times. By sunset, major sports outlets had picked it up, embedding the clip beneath headlines that strained to make sense of something so tender, so simple. A gift beyond the game. Brotherhood in a box. Giannis's real MVP moment. They didn't know the backstory. They didn't know about the cramped bedroom or the freezing tile floor, or the whispering nights spent dreaming through hunger. They didn't know the precise value of a childhood memory, or the real price of what Giannis had done to reclaim it. But they felt it, and that was enough. What moved people wasn't the object, but the gesture. Not the card, but what it symbolized. In a world obsessed with spectacle, here was something unpolished, quiet, raw. Two men who had conquered the world, one with headlines, the other with heart, reunited not through glory, but through memory. In the hours that followed, social media turned into a flood of shared stories. Siblings reminiscing about childhood rituals, old toys retrieved from attics, yellowed letters found between books, distant apologies offered at last. It wasn't just a moment between two brothers anymore. It was a mirror. People saw themselves in that silence, in the unspoken thank you, in the sacred rediscovery of something thought to be gone forever. The Bucks PR team reached out to ask if they should do something official with the story, a press release, maybe a short featurette. Giannis politely declined. It wasn't for the world, he said. The world just happened to see it. Still, the questions poured in. Reporters asked about the card, about where he found it, about why it mattered so much. Thanasis deflected with a smile and a shrug. It's just something between us. Giannis echoed the same. They didn't need to explain. Those who understood, understood. But privately, behind the closed doors of their shared spaces, hotel rooms, team flights, quiet gym corners, they talked more than they had in years. About that old apartment. about how their mother used to hum when she cooked, about their father's laugh, deep and shaking, like thunder under a warm sky, about the old court with the crooked rim, and about the card, and how it somehow carried all of that in its thin, fragile frame. "Do you remember how I kept it under my pillow?" Thanasis asked one evening, eyes half closed as they sat in the corner of the training facility post-practice. "I remember you told me you had dreams of it turning into a real player," Giannis replied with a grin. "I did, and then it did. You." Giannis looked down, his smile fading into something softer. "You kept me believing," he said. It was more than a compliment. It was a confession. Because the truth, something neither of them had ever spoken aloud, was that during the long climb to greatness, Giannis had often felt like a fraud, like a kid still pretending, still playing with tape and paper and dreams. Thanasis had been the certainty, the fire, the one who had never wavered, never needed applause. He had been the real engine. Giannis had just been lucky enough to follow that energy and ride it into the stars. Now, for the first time, Giannis had given something back, and it hadn't come in the form of a luxury car or a house or even a championship ring. It had come as a memory restored, a bond acknowledged, a chapter, once lost, rewritten. Weeks passed. The card stayed with Thanasis. He didn't display it, didn't frame it. He kept it tucked inside a small black pouch he carried in his backpack, along with his rosary, a photo of their father, and a handwritten note their mother had given them before they left Greece for the first time. Sometimes during road trips, Thanasis would take the card out just to look at it. Not to show it to anyone, just to hold it, to remember. Once, on a long flight to a West Coast game, he showed it to Giannis again. "You know," he said, "this thing was never about Iverson." Giannis smirked. "Of course it was, he was the best." Thanasis chuckled. "No, I mean, it was about us, about what we thought we could be, and what we became." There was a silence after that. Not heavy, not sad, just full. Because in that moment, they both understood something they had always known but never articulated. Success hadn't changed them. It had revealed them. It had pulled forward everything that had already existed in the tightest corners of their lives, the love, the sacrifice, the impossible hope, and made it visible to the world. And now, through 38 seconds of accidental footage, the world had seen it too. The team noticed the change, not in numbers, not in stats, but in the quiet way the brothers moved together, like a pair of planets with invisible gravity, like twin lights that didn't need to speak to shine in sync. The chemistry on court became more fluid, the joy more contagious. Something had realigned. Eventually, during an off-season, a journalist managed to get one direct quote from Giannis about the gift. He said only this: "Some things, when lost, are gone forever. But some things, they wait. And if you love them enough, if you remember them the right way, they come back." That line was printed across headlines. It made its way onto t-shirts, posters, motivational feeds. But for Giannis, it wasn't about being quotable. It was about being honest. Because the gift wasn't about nostalgia, it was about truth. About making sure Thanasis knew, beyond all doubt, that he had never been the sidekick. He had been the beginning, the foundation, the keeper of dreams when dreams were all they had. In a league of legends, in a world obsessed with numbers and legacies, Giannis had rewritten the narrative, not through stats, but through soul. He had made it clear, greatness wasn't just what you achieved. It was what you remembered, what you reclaimed, what you gave back. And in the quiet of one dinner, in the passing of one small, taped-up card, a story unfolded that moved millions, not because it was grand, but because it was human. The kind of story that reminds us all, we are not what we have, we are what we share.